Now, lockdown has, of course, been hard for everyone. We almost don't need to say that, do we, really? But for those battling drug or alcohol addiction, it has, of course, been incredibly tough because the pressures on top of things that are already going on as well can take someone to absolute breaking point. Now, organisations like the Matthew Project, which has been around for 35 odd years at least, are helping people live free from addiction. And now they've launched a new campaign to help veterans of conflict deal with PTSD and substance abuse. Wayne Copsey is the manager of the service, which is called Outside the Wire. And fingers crossed, down a wire, via Zoom, we should be able to speak to Wayne now. Good morning, Wayne.
Good morning, Ed.
Hello there. Thank you ever so much for joining us on BBC Radio Norfolk. So Outside the Wire, this link to helping veterans deal with a whole range of issues tied to that. Wayne, just remind us, what is your connection with the armed forces?
Well, I served in the RAF regiment for 23 years. I left the military in 2006. And this is where we still have that sort of connection through Outside the Wire.
Yes, so it comes from, it's sort of, well, obviously you've experienced a life in service in the armed forces. You will have seen your comrades have these issues, and especially in that period. So you joined in, 1983, was it, Wayne?
1983, yeah.
1983. So you would have seen actions such as the Gulf War, presumably, both Gulf Wars, in fact, I'm assuming. And, of course, this Sunday, in fact, marks 30 years since the end of the First Gulf War. How many people came back from that dealing with PTSD? Because we already heard this last week about more research going into Gulf War syndrome. But actually the PTSD, the ongoing effects for many people coming out of the Gulf War, you must have dealt with people like that. You must have seen people like that, and it must really hammer home the reason why we need a service called Outside the Wire, Wayne.
Yeah, definitely. I served in the First Gulf War, and it's obvious now that people who served in that conflict and recent conflict are now starting to manifest the symptoms of PTSD. PTSD isn't one of those things that you have immediately. It's something that can appear later on in life. For example, I left the service in 2006, and I was starting to have issues myself with PTSD in 2010.
So a 4-year gap. It's a long gap, isn't it? It's a very long gap, and just when you think maybe you're not being affected by it, does it come in a wave? Does it sort of take and hit you completely out of the blue, Wayne? What was your experience?
Well, like many service people, I left the services thinking I was 100% okay. And then an emotional trigger happened later on in my life, and this opened lots of little boxes that I'd sealed away subconsciously, and all these issues started to pour out.
One of the big things is obviously your character, naturally, because you were picked to serve in the forces, and people who haven't served will just assume that you're all as tough as nails, and therefore, you're perfectly trained to deal with these issues, but you were trained to fight, you were trained to survive. You weren't necessarily, presumably, trained to deal with the aftermath of conflict.
No, that's right. Obviously, we go through quite rigorous training. However, that training doesn't help you a lot when you actually start to have mental health issues. I must admit the service is a lot better now, identifying issues with their servicemen and women, and help is readily available. However, when I left in 2006, the help then wasn't that great, to be honest.
No, and therefore you I don't know how you felt, but you must have felt very much alone from it, because once you've left the service, particularly, we're only talking 15 years ago, but it's such a stark difference, isn't it? When you left the service, you must have felt very much on your own battling those issues.
Yeah, it is. 23 years of in any job is it's going to be a big change when you actually leave. But when you are in a service environment going into Civvy Street, then yes, there is it is a big emotional tie also.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? It isn't just about PTSD, although that is a very sad and very complicated and prevalent issue. It is sometimes for many that conversion, that life of service, particularly for yourself, 23 years in service, that's such a large chunk of your life. But for people who have served for many years, to then come out and be back on Civvy Street, and how they adjust to that can lead to issues further down the line.
Yeah, it's... I look at it this way: you can either walk out of the camp gates on your last day and turn right into a supportive, successful career afterwards, or some people unfortunately do not have that support network in place when they leave. They take the turn on the left, and this is where they start to get into difficulties. And that's either through substance misuse or PTSD or both, and that's where we start to have the issues appear.
And that is where something like the Matthew Project and Outside the Wire, the service that you manage, comes in. Because it might seem an obvious question, but how does something like PTSD, how does the issues around that lead some people, some former service personnel, to get into substance misuse, Wayne?
We normally find the issue would be is naturally the service people are quite proud in themselves, and it's very hard to ask for help. So what tends to happen is if they are having mental health issues, they tend to possibly self-medicate. That would lead on to issues with alcohol. They tend to find that's not serving its purpose after a while. So they may start to turn to substances like drugs, cocaine, whatever.
It's so incredibly sad, isn't it? Because these are men and women that have given, put their lives on the line and given almost a lifetime of service. And as you said, luckily now the armed forces are now beginning to recognise this as an issue and trying to put support in place. But did you feel as though there was almost this vacuum created where people were allowed to just decline? People were allowed to go into substance misuse and abusing drugs, abusing alcohol, because they had nothing else to turn to try and dampen down the pain, and probably what they didn't understand was PTSD. Yeah,
it's there is help out there, but it wasn't widely advertised because it's not a very good thing for the military to admit to. However, since Outside the Wire was first established in 2013, it was obvious then that there was a need for an organisation like ours to pick up these people.
Yes.
And I think the reason why we are successful in what we do is the team is all but one made up of veterans. So we have that instant bond straight away when we meet clients.
Yeah, because it must be incredibly hard to understand. We can have an idea if we've had someone in our family, a relationship or whatever, who've served. But really, you need to hear from someone who has experienced it firsthand, because I feel it talking to you. I've got family in the armed services. I've never served, so I feel as though I'm not qualified to talk to you about this at all. So it must help enormously, and particularly from your experience, because when you realise that something really had gone wrong, something was not right, what led you to get that support? What was that journey, I suppose, is one way to describe it. What was that like for you, Wayne?
It took a lot, to be honest. It took a few years for me to realise that I was having issues. I think it was other people that were pointing out my issues rather than myself identifying them. But however, I've got a very supportive family. I've got a very, very supportive network of friends within Outside the Wire and the Matthew Project and further afield. And they were the ones who encouraged me to get clinical help. And my only regret is that I didn't do it earlier.
Which is often the case for anybody going through mental health issues, isn't it? And it is that first step. We'll talk more, Wayne, and thank you for being so honest and upfront about this. And it's good to hear your first-hand experience and what is driving projects like Outside the Wire and within the Matthew Project. Wayne, if you're all right to sit tight, it'd be really nice to speak to you more about the work of Outside the Wire and how people can help and how veterans can get in touch. Are you okay with that? Is that all right, Wayne?
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. That's Wayne Copsey. We're going to speak to Wayne in just a couple of minutes' time. Manager of the service Outside the Wire through organisations like the Matthew Project, which is helping veterans of conflict deal with PTSD and subsequent abuse of substances, drugs, alcohol. Really, it's just an awful situation, isn't it? But yet, there is help out there as well. I don't know if you're willing to or able to talk to me this morning about this, but this is something that's close to home for you. And it's okay, and you feel as though you're up to speaking to me this morning. You can drop me a text, don't have to call. It's 813. You can drop me a text, don't have to call. It's 81333. Start your message with the word Norfolk. Rick has done just that. He says, "Good morning, Ed. 8 years ago, I went to the Matthew Project, and I've never looked back. They are absolutely amazing. Keep your experiences coming, and we'll meet up with Wayne in a couple of minutes' time after Ed Sheeran." And that is free phone. Do that now. You've got about 5 minutes before lines close. Or you can text the phrase Norfolk Noise to 81333 and it'll cost you your standard network rate. Coming up then, we will turn to Wayne Copsey, manager of Outside the Wire, which is helping veterans of conflict deal with PTSD and substance abuse. Plus, Wayne has been telling his own story from serving in the armed forces for 23 years and how that impacted on him. Don't miss that. That's coming up next.
Radio Norfolk.
So, as we've been hearing this morning, the pressures of lockdown are bad enough for anybody, but if you are battling a drug or alcohol issue, it's been just unimaginably tough, and I don't pretend to understand that fully. It's not something I've gone through, but many people have, and sadly a large proportion of those people are veterans, former veterans, people who've been in the armed forces who've dealt with conflict, and then on top of that PTSD, and it's led them to a path of substance abuse. And that's where organisations like the Matthew Project, who help people live free from addiction, come in. And now they've got this new service called Outside the Wire, which is being managed by Wayne Copsey, who spent 23 years. It was in the RAF, wasn't it, Wayne?
Yeah, RAF Regiment.
Yeah, RAF Regiment. Wayne, let's talk about how Outside the Wire works then. If you've got a former or a veteran comes to you and they need your help, what's that process like, Wayne?
The first thing they need to understand is that we are a fully non-judgmental and confidential support service. So what would happen is they can either be referred to us by their GP or other services, or family and friends can get in contact with us via our webpage, or they can contact us directly. And then what I would do is I would allocate a practitioner to contact them, normally within 24 hours to 48 hours, and they would carry an online assessment or telephone assessment. In normal times, pre-pandemic, we would meet the person face-to-face in a location of their choice, and then we'd construct a care plan and a plan to go forward. And we would be able to advise them if they need clinical help, either through the NSFT or other organisations such as Walking with the Wounded, Combat Stress. And we would support them through their journey of recovery. And that could be through telephone conversations, like I said, which is the current operating procedure at the moment due to COVID. We have support groups they can attend. We have one currently running in Sheringham and in our centre at Oak Street in Norwich. And we're fortunate enough to get some funding from the Armed Forces Covenant recently that will allow us to set up further groups in RAF Marham, Watton and Colchester.
That's good. The coverage then is so important, isn't it? And that's great that there are a number of ways to access the service, but with your own personal experience of this, your own personal experience of coming out of the forces 4 years later, realising that it was PTSD, what is the one thing that you would have wanted someone to have done to help you? What do you, now looking back, what were you looking for to kind of start that process of getting better?
I think the main thing in my recovery was that I didn't want to believe it myself. PTSD was something that happened to other people, not myself. The most important thing is to swallow your pride and ask for help. Whether you go and see your GP or you can give us a call directly. Like we say, we can relate to the issues people have experienced in the past. And we're there to help. We're not there to judge people. We're there to help.
That's so important, isn't it? And it isn't. It's not a sign of weakness, is it? It's just that it is that initial step of getting. It's hard to say, but almost getting over the pride side of things and actually realising that this can't go on. You need someone else to help support you through something like this. So, if someone does need help, or you know someone who's going through this, how can they get in touch with the service, Wayne?
Probably the easiest way is if they go on to Google and type in Outside the Wire, the Matthew Project, follow the links on the main page, and there's a contact form they can fill out, and that'll come directly to myself. Or they can call us on a Norwich number, which is 01603 626 123, and somebody will take a message and it'll pass on to me. Or they can email us directly, and the email address is outsidethewire@matthewproject.org.
Great. Thank you so much, Wayne, for everything you're doing and everyone else at Outside the Wire. We'll keep those details, and if people haven't got a chance to write those down, they might know our studio number, 0800 389 7321. You can give us a call on that and we will pass on those details. Wayne, the one thing I haven't asked you, you've been so honest this morning and so good to open up and speak to Norfolk about the issues that you faced when you came out of the RAF regiment. What are things looking like for you now, 11 years on from when you realised that you needed to get extra help and support, Wayne? What are things looking like for you at the moment?
Very positive, to be honest, Ed. I am getting help from the NSFT and my GP, so I am in a lot better place. So there is, PTSD will never go away. It is images or sounds or smells that have burnt into your memory bank. However, these professionals do give you tools to help you deal with it. And that, I'd highly recommend anybody out there with any issues at all, whether it is substance misuse or mental health issues, to contact us as quickly as possible.
Well, Wayne, thank you so much for speaking to us on BBC Radio Norfolk and being so open and honest about your own situation. That is Wayne Copsey, manager of the Outside the Wire service, which is run through the Matthew Project, helping people, particularly veterans of conflict, deal with PTSD and any subsequent substance abuse. We've got the numbers here, so do make sure you get in touch with us if you need that extra help and support. It's 0800 389 7321.